Welcome, welcome, welcome to today's podcast, The Real Reason Most Succession Plans Fail and What to Do About It. That's what we're going to talk about today. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, as many families over the years, and succession is one of those things that kind of creep up on people because it's something that they don't want to talk about, but also the speed of getting there is quite fascinating because we're so busy with our businesses that we forget to think about the small things, which is the transition, the baton passing. And so um, a lot of succession plans fail not because of bad numbers, but really because of broken communications and conversations. On one side of the spectrum, we have this document plan that is there and is sitting on the shelf and collecting dust, and it's breaking case of emergency type of thing. When some chaos happens or someone gets sick, we pull it off and start executing a plan. On the other side, we have the people who are actually going to do the work. We have the internal executives of the operating business. We have the family members that are involved with the business and non-family members that are involved with the business on the outside as advisors. And so we have a lot of these characters and stakeholders involved. And in the middle is the glue, right? It's that conversation of who does what, when, and how, right? And so the execution risk is what we're talking about today and how to help people look at a plan, make sure it's right, but also be aware of the processes that are involved with succession. And so a lot of my clients, when we first talk in discovery or through networking opportunities, most of them say, I have a plan in place. There's no need to talk to you. We have an attorney over here that has papered everything. We have our internal group that thinks they know what we're doing. And I have someone in mind that is going to be my successor. But what they fail to do is, again, take the document and the people and kind of mesh it together. And so today we're going to pull back the curtain on what wealthy families do and then how they go about their process as well as things that they do wrong. And so again, it's a process that's near and dear to everyone's own process. And so before we get started, there is a succession scorecard survey that you can fill out and get a understanding of where your plan starts today. And that's in the description of this video. My name is Tommy. I've helped business owners turn unfinished succession plan into actionable roadmaps without replacing their own current advisors and let them get back to what's important, being present for their family and their business. I've spent the past 15 years inside family offices of America's wealthiest families, and I've seen firsthand what makes them tick and what makes them successful from generation to next generation. And a lot of it is not the strategy of hope, right? Hope is not the strategy that they implement. The strategy is more of lead with purpose, communicate with clarity, and plan with intention, right? What are the three things that help them maneuver from generation to generation? And so we'll kind of unpack that today as well. And so the journey that we're going to talk about is kind of a four-phase process. This is what I go with my clients. I walk through this process with them all the time. It's very systematic and it's very straightforward, right? It's A, it's B, a C, and a D. There's four phases to this. So the first phase is assess. Next phase is we're building the foundation. Third step, we're crafting it, and then we're deploying it, putting it out into the real world to see how it plays out. So in the assess phase, right, this is really more of an internal look at the patriarch or matriarch, whoever created the wealth, and say, what are confronting the fears and clarifying the vision that you have for your business, right? Getting down into the meat of your feelings and how you see things and how you want to perceive and move forward, right? Then once you get that assessed, you figure out the build part. Constructing a solid foundation, like I said, right? The bedrock that everything sits upon is so important when there's so much uncertainty in the world these days. And then we start crafting it, right? Refining the details with precision and care. I would say that to think that your plane will be 100% airtight day one is unacceptable. It's not going to happen. And so don't put that in your mind. So you have to just start and put something together, a framework that works for you. It might be 60%, might be 80% of the way there. Either way, you're going to continue to perfect it as the process continues. And then the last part is deploy, right? Launching it with confidence and making sure it's sustainable so that if something ever happens, it's flexible enough to maneuver through the ups and downs that might come about, but also flexible enough to just be able to adapt as inputs come in and are changing. If it's tax, if it's family members, or maybe it's executives that you thought were going to be successors, they're no longer involved with the business. And so again, the ABCD method is in place. So let's focus on the cold hard facts. Let's stop right here for one moment. The reason why I'm doing these series and putting this out there and taking my experience of working with wealthy families and very successful families on the business front, but also mirrored success on the succession, was because of this. This is the frustrating part with the industry that I want to change and try to help people as much as possible. When we talk about settling for the ordinary, this is the piece that really, just if I had to get going, this is it. As much as 70% of wealth transitions fail by the second generation. You heard that right. The parents who created the wealth, by the time their children get involved or in the process of the business is gone. And what is that? And that's just, to me, a failed opportunity to help families transition from one generation to the next generation. So how can we break that cycle? And again, the ABCD model that we have here for succession planning does cover this. And we all think that it's bad advice, bad tax advice, missing documentation. But really, what it comes down to, it boils down to unclear leadership, silence, and family misalignment, right? That family dynamics that people don't think about, that are present at the Thanksgiving dinner, right? Where people show up because they have to, their family, but there's something underground that's really at the crux of a lot of issues in the family. And then we talk about something that's broken, right? That state binder collecting dust in the corner, break when emergency occurs, really on its own isn't going to do anything, right? That's just a paper document with a set of instructions. The execution piece is the risk, right? The execution of having the right people involved that are capable of executing a plan, right? So when it comes to succession planning, it can't just sit on the shelf and hope that's going to work. We have to live by it and almost gameplay it and making sure we test it. And so that's part of, again, that craft and deployed portion of this program. So let's break the pattern of failure, right? Let's look at what's really the opportunities, the three opportunities that really I see with my clients when it comes down to succession planning, and try to be very successful at it. We want to place people over binder, right? The formatted document with what happens is great as an academic exercise, but application is the other thing. So really focusing on the people and making sure that they're trained for the right thing. So most plans live in a binder, not in people. Let's flip the script on that. Um, the other piece here is a great example. Treating this process like the natural evolution of a family, right? As a family grows and matures, the business grows and matures, right? Let's not just make this a homework assignment where we're checking the box saying, "Yep, I got my succession plan ready. I got my exit plan ready. I'm ready to move forward." And then also breaking the silos, right? Let's break those silos down and let's have a more holistic approach when it comes to planning, right? Because I always get this, right? My legal guy never talked to my tax guy. My executive team, here it is, objectives is for business continuity, right? Not family dynamics, right? And I had a client, this is hits home a big time here, where, and I get animated about this. This is why I speed up and whatnot. But what this one client told me was, my CFO will take care of coordination with the family and communications. And the question I had for him was, what if the CFO had to had a tough conversation with your child? Like, is that something that he would be willing to do? He says, no, he was too uncomfortable for that. I said, that's exactly what happens, is that we need to create a framework, a, a, I would say an environment that allows that conversation to have. But sometimes those executives aren't incentivized or aren't compensated, let's say, to talk to family members in a way that family members need to be told about certain situations. And so they will gravitate back to how they're being incentivized. And part of it is just focusing on the business and not worrying about the family part. And so, again, training, right? Let's train people versus naming people to be successors, right? And so when we look at this, again, the process of just naming someone on a document is great, but it's the execution. The execution risk to any plan is the biggest piece of it. And so let's make sure we train people, not just name them as successors. So this is a funny, I had a client that called it the just in case binder, right? This is an outdated, it's collecting dust in the corner, but that's how he called it, right? He called it the, just in case binder. And some of the things that we were uncovering and talking through discovery, these are the things that kind of came out, right? He built a thriving business, right? But never named a clear successor. That's something that kind of was eating at him, was wanting to make sure that he had the right person in place. The family made quite assumptions. They assumed business was going to continue to run under current leadership, right? So no one talked about it, right? No one talked about it. Legal documents were in place. Great. They took the first step, but no one understood the plan. No one knew how the plan would execute, right? Because no one ever shared it with the executive team. Key employees were loyal, but completely unprepared to take lead, right? And so leadership of an operating business is great, but leading through succession from one generation to the next is a different skill set. Let's make sure we practice that. His absence, right, even for a short period of time, would have triggered confusion. So when he would go take a vacation for a month, he was always worried about what the business is doing, who's making decisions, and are clients being serviced. And then again, this is another one, right? The final one was felt stuck between protecting what he built and also letting go. That's something that many owners who have created something that's their baby have a problem with, right? Is that they built it, it's their identity. If they let it go, it's going to change. And so if we look at this honestly through the assess phase, we should really be thinking about like how this was going to look. And sometimes it's okay to have change, but also sometimes it's something we need to keep, like culture, right? Keep the culture in place. And so these are the just in case binder didn't really talk about these things, right? And so this is the client and I met. These are things that kind of came out and said, okay, there's a process here that has been started, but he needs help. And so I have a client that I call the architect of his own exit. And so I wanted to go through this process with what he used on this ABCD method and how he succeeded. And before we do that, though, if you want and are serious about looking at your succession plan, I encourage you to take the 60-second succession scorecard survey. The link is in the bio, and you'll be fascinated about what comes from that. Keep that legacy not just about assets on the balance sheet, but you look at it as an alignment of business executives, alignment amongst the family, and then alignment amongst the family and the executives, right? And so thought about all this kind of in a multifaceted. Then he looked at real inheritance, right? Not about money, but the mindset, right? Thinking about how to make sure that the next generation, right, not having 70% of families transitions fail by generation two. How do we keep that mindset going to the next generation so it's there in perpetuity? We talk about clarity and communication, right? Invited all stakeholders, family, non-family, outside advisors into the conversation, right? Which was future focused dialogue, right? Talked about the future of when he was not going to be there, right? And so having those conversations and being open about that. And then he also looked at forming a leadership council that he was on, but eventually kind of over time stepped back because he wanted the leadership to take some of his ideas, right? So again, that control piece and some of the changes that we talked about in the assessment phase, really, how can we create accounts that's focused the way he was focused and then eventually step back so that the business can move forward? And then when we look at team, right, the team first transition, right, he never had someone that was a true successor, but he looked at this and said, well, maybe it's an opportunity to really, instead of choosing one successor, really fixate on the team itself and bring in multiple disciplines and multiple ways of thinking to maybe better serve the business, right? And so he valued complementary strengths, right? That's the way he looked at it because he was a one-man band for so long. To have those skill sets in one person to lead this organization forward was probably unrealistic. And so he took that approach when it came to team first. Then culture was a big piece for him, right? He wanted to make sure that what he built in terms of culture and what he let go and moved forward still remained. Some things, when operationally, yes, you can make changes, but he felt that culture was what built the business and also what helped service the clients. And so he coined this thing called the trial of absence, right? It was this interesting dynamic where he couldn't go for 30 days. Now he's like, I'm going to leave for 60 days and test this out and see how this is going to work. So we coined it the trial of absence. So I'm going to take that. Thank you very much, Jim. Um, what happens when leadership isn't in the room? That was the focus of that exercise, is how are leaders going to not only make the right decisions or wrong decisions, but the process of making those decisions, as well as who's going to be the leader, who's filling what role, right? And so just seeing this whole process play out in this trial of absence was kind of interesting. And so if you look at the ABCDs, right? The first phase, assess, right? Intentionally looking at the vision of what he wanted as more internal facing. And then he looked at the build phase, right? Clarity and communication. Then he focused on the craft, right? The what, how am I going to build this out? What is the team I'm going to put in place? And then deploy, right? So he wanted to keep the culture, but also test out how this work was going to, affect future, clients and contracts and whatnot. And so again, here is the ABCD methodology in place with this particular client. And so before we take, have key takeaways, again, if you want to take a look at where you stand in terms of your succession, there's a 60-second succession scorecard survey. It's a link in the bio below. Take a look. If you are interested, print it out, look at it. Again, it's something that I put together for my clients as kind of that first step when I look at assessments. And so it might help you out. So hopefully you can find the same value that my clients do. So when we look at key takeaways, right? The A, right? Assess, confront the uncomfortable truths, right? Again, look inside at yourself and say, as a business owner of a successful business, what do I want succession to look like? And then, what is missing? What's unclear? And then assumed in your current plan, right? So assumptions are terrible. We don't want to have any um, ambiguity or people's interpretation. You want to be very crystal clear when it comes to communicating. And then B, right? Clarity over complexity. Keep it simple, stupid. I had a client that always kept saying, kiss, kiss, kiss. Keep it simple, stupid, because again, ambiguity, resentments start to leak in. And so, what must happen if you're unavailable for 60 days, right? Again, it should be to a point where people should know it's in their process of executing. And then alignment across people, right? That's a big thing is executives across executives, family across family, and then also family across executives, right? Thinking about how this is all aligned. So does your family, your executive team, and outside advisors know the plan, right? Are they on the same plan, right? It's sitting on there on a shelf collecting dust, but are they there when it comes to execution and minimizing that risk involved with executing your plan? And then D, activation through testing, right? Test, test, test. Start the process and then continue to perfect it as you have more inputs, right? And so have your pressure tested succession before life happens, right? You don't want something happening where you're now forced to get into that process. So it all starts at the top. It always does. And so you have tremendous influence over this whole process. So you have the ability to really dictate how you want this thing to move. And really, what doesn't really kill the succession, but what does is hesitation. What doesn't isn't your team, your kids, or the market conditions, is really your hesitation. So let's leverage your influence and intentionally make this happen the way it should happen. Again, we looked at this architect, right, of his own exit. We looked at how, the intentional vision was the assess phase, the craft, the clarity and communication was the build phase. Craft phase was really more team focused, and then deploy was looking at culture and long term. And so if we look at kind of, if anything else in this video series, if you watch none more of my videos, this right here you'll be able to take this away on your own, DIY, do it with your own executive team, with your own advisors, your own family. You don't even need me. This is the slide from here on is going to help you implement this process for a intentionally successful succession plan. So again, assess where you are, really today. Really look at where you are and be I would say honest and vulnerable with that process. Don't confuse activity with like, documentation as if you're ready, because documents don't mean you have a plan, right? The plan is the execution risk. So let's make sure we are executing. And then always have in the back of your mind during this phase, if I stepped away tomorrow, will they know exactly what to do? And more importantly is why? Why would they do something? So again, let's think about that as we go through this process. And then the build phase, right? Build the right, you know, connections, right? Making sure the conversations are being had and bringing the right people to the right, the right community, to the right tables, to the communications. And so family, key employees, advisors, have those conversations independently all together, but make sure you have them early and often, right? Because that's what it comes down to is that, again, you have this influence on how you want this process to work. And then use sometimes a neutral facilitator. This is where I step in a lot of times with families as a sounding board, where I help them through the process, ask the tough questions that management will ask, answer some of the family questions the family won't answer. And so just kind of being that neutral person involved. And then crafting, right? Crafting, future trust doesn't center on you, right? Making sure that, that the future isn't what you want, but it is what you want, but it is not involving you at all. And so making sure the succession is part of that process. And so the goal isn't to control from the sidelines, it's to build a system that thrives without you. Again, making sure it goes on autopilot. And then again, start identifying the people, the structure, and the values you need and want that's going to endure and create the clarity around those roles. Because again, clarity and keeping it simple is going to be to your benefit, right? And so deploy with intention, not perfection. Just get started. That's the point. This whole process is just a start. You don't have to be perfect out of the gate. If you're 60% of the way there, great. If you're 80, even better. But this process will evolve as you continue to go on and learn and have more inputs. And then again, run scenario planning. Empower your successors while you're still in the picture, right? You want to make sure that they can have these failures and then come back to you and say, I saw this happen, so I reacted this way. Why did it not turn out? And maybe they did the right thing, right? Maybe they did what they're supposed to do. And they did it for the right reasons, but maybe there was some issues that were unbeknownst to them, or maybe it just didn't work out. And so having you around is what you want to happen so that again you are this ball of energy and knowledge that you need to share. And so whenever you're in the room with people who are making mistakes and you're teaching them, it's a marvelous thing. And then so let's just kind of as we're kind of tapering off here, if you want to protect everything you've built, right, and preserve the family trust that you have, right, it won't happen by accident. And so let's make sure you continue to influence the process, influence how you want things to turn out, influence the culture and the team that's being built around you so that when you do step back, it continues on without any issues. So again, really flex your influence on this process. And so just want to again reiterate, my years of working with families and supporting them in their family offices, these are wealthy families and sometimes they do have, issues and mistakes that occur during the time. And I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And it happens. It happens across all families. And so again, what doesn't work is hope, right? That's not a strategy. And so what I've seen that have been repeatable amongst my clients as well as case studies that I've studied is leading with a purpose, communicating with clarity, and then planning with intention, right? That's really what's going to happen because when that process is in place, you're building that foundation that can survive any storm that's thrown your way. Please leave comments. I want to make sure that the content that I'm providing is something that's valuable to you and your family. Succession plan is something that we shouldn't really be waiting on, but something that should be intentional and just have fun with it because again, setting it, forgetting it is not going to work. There's too many failures out there. So why settle for the ordinary? So cheers to your success. I'll see you next time. Thanks.